The news from Salt Lake City on September 15, 2025 landed with the force of a physical blow. Charlie Kirk, the provocative conservative activist and founder of Turning Point USA, had been shot. He was leaving a speaking engagement at the University of Utah when a lone assailant fired multiple rounds, leaving him critically wounded. The attack itself was shocking enough, a stark act of political violence that sent ripples of fear and condemnation across the country. Kirk built his career on being a lightning rod for controversy. He became an instant symbol. For his supporters, he was a martyr, a victim of the very political hatred they believed the left was stoking. For his detractors, the event became a deeply uncomfortable and complex moment. The incident immediately transcended the specific details of the crime. It wasn't just about one man being attacked, it became a national Rorschach test for the state of American discourse. The shooting happened against a backdrop of years of escalating political animosity, where online battles and rhetorical warfare had become the norm. The attack seemed to make the abstract dangers of this environment terrifyingly real. It laid bare the raw nerves of a nation struggling with deep-seated divisions. The shooting of Charlie Kirk wasn't just a news story, it was a moment of crisis. In the hours and days following the shooting, social media platforms became a digital tinderbox. The reactions were instantaneous and fiercely polarized, a real-time reflection of America's fractured state. On one side, there was a massive outpouring of prayers, support, condemnation of the violence. Hashtags like "Pray for Charlie, Stand Against Violence." Supporters shared images of Kirk. However, a darker and more unsettling reaction quickly emerged from the fringes of the internet. A shocking number of accounts posted messages celebrating the attack, callous jokes, memes, outright endorsements of the violence. A high school teacher in California, a graphic designer in Texas, a barista in Florida, were among those whose celebratory posts went viral. Screenshots were captured and disseminated rapidly by conservative outrage aggregators, creating a feedback loop of fury. The consequences for those who posted these inflammatory comments were swift and severe. The high school teacher was placed on administrative leave within 24 hours after a deluge of angry emails and phone calls flooded the school district's office. The graphic designer's employer issued a public statement announcing his termination, stating his views were incompatible with the values of the company. The barista was fired after her coffee shop's Yelp pages. Google pages were review-bombed by activists. In a high-profile case, a backup player for a professional soccer team was suspended indefinitely by his league after a tweet surfaced in which he sarcastically offered thoughts and prayers to the karma that had visited Kirk. These firings and suspensions became a story in themselves, sparking a secondary debate about cancel culture and corporate accountability. This rapid-fire cycle, online post, public outrage, professional consequence, highlighted the new reality of the digital age. Your online speech, even on a personal account, can have immediate and life-altering repercussions. As the digital furor intensified, government officials felt compelled to weigh in.
The president, in a televised address from the Oval Office, unequivocally condemned the shooting as a cowardly and despicable act of political violence.
He called for national unity and urged Americans to reject hatred in all its forms. However, he also made a point to address the online celebrations, calling them deeply disturbing and a stain on our national character. Law enforcement agencies quickly became involved, including the FBI. The FBI's Salt Lake City field office announced it was monitoring online activity for any threats of copycat violence or illegal incitement. The Department of Justice followed with a stern warning, reminding the public that while hateful speech itself is often protected, speech that directly incites violence, makes true threats, or solicits a crime is not.
The Attorney General stated, "We will prosecute anyone who crosses the line from expressing an opinion to inciting lawless action to the fullest extent of the law."
This official rhetoric was a clear attempt to calm a volatile situation and reassert legal boundaries. Officials were careful not to suggest that hate speech itself was illegal, knowing the First Amendment implications. However, these statements also created confusion and concern among civil liberties advocates. The promise to monitor online activity raised questions about the scope of government surveillance, and what criteria would be used to distinguish between protected, albeit vile, speech and a genuine criminal threat. The term hate speech, often used colloquially by politicians, has no legal definition in the United States, and its use by government officials worried those who feared a potential crackdown on unpopular political views. The government's response, while necessary, inadvertently highlighted the deep and unresolved tensions in American law and culture over how to handle speech that is hateful but not explicitly illegal. This set the stage for a broader government response that sought to walk a fine line between condemning hate and respecting free speech principles. In the wake of the firings and government statements, legal experts and constitutional scholars entered the fray, attempting to bring clarity to a muddled and emotional public debate. The central point they emphasized was a concept often misunderstood by the public. The First Amendment primarily restricts the government, not private actors.
A constitutional lawyer appearing on a major news network explained it simply. The Constitution prevents Congress, or any state or local government, from passing a law that punishes you for your speech.
It does not prevent your private employer from firing you, a private company from banning you, or your neighbors from shunning you. Experts repeatedly pointed to the 1969 Supreme Court case, Brandenburg v. Ohio, as the key precedent.
This landmark decision established the imminent lawless action test, which holds that speech can only be punished by the government if it is directed at inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. Simply celebrating a tragedy or expressing a hateful opinion, no matter how morally repugnant, does not meet this high bar.
The speech must be a direct call to immediate violence, not just an expression of abstract belief. The discussion then turned to what is not protected. Experts were quick to delineate the established exceptions to the First Amendment. These include incitement to imminent lawless action, defamation, like libel and slander, true threats, and speech that violates intellectual property law.
If someone posted the shooter's manifesto and urged others to go out and do the same thing tomorrow, that could cross the line into incitement.
If they sent a direct message to another political figure saying you're next, that is a true threat. These examples helped the public differentiate between offensive opinions and criminally prosecutable speech. Ultimately, the consensus among legal scholars was that most of the celebratory posts, while vile, were legally protected from government prosecution. However, they also agreed that the firings by private companies were, in most cases, perfectly legal. The Charlie Kirk shooting and its aftermath threw a national spotlight on a deeply divisive question. When should speech have consequences, and when do those consequences become a form of censorship? This debate moved beyond the legalities of the First Amendment and into the messier realm of social norms and ethics. One side argued forcefully that society has a right and a responsibility to enforce standards of decency. They contended that celebrating political violence is not a legitimate point of view but a corrosive act that undermines the foundations of a peaceful society. From this perspective, firings and social ostracism are not censorship, they are accountability. It is society organically rejecting behavior it deems unacceptable. This argument posits that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences. A columnist wrote, "You are free to stand on a street corner and shout that you hope a public figure dies. The government won't arrest you, but you are not entitled to a job, but you are not entitled to a platform, but you are not entitled to the respect of your community while you do it." This viewpoint suggests that social and economic consequences are a healthy mechanism for maintaining a functional civil society. Employers have a right to protect their brand. The consequences in this view are the free market. The consequences are the court of public opinion at work. On the other side were those who feared a dangerous slide toward mob-enforced censorship. They argued that swift, outrage-fueled firings created a chilling effect that would stifle controversial or unpopular speech. If someone can lose their livelihood for a single offensive tweet, who will be brave enough to express dissent? This camp worried the definition of unacceptable speech was becoming overly broad and politically biased. Today it might be celebrating violence, but tomorrow it could be questioning a prevailing social or political orthodoxy. They saw the firings as the tyranny of the majority or the tyranny of the loudest voices online. The risk was the privatization of censorship. While the government is constrained by the First Amendment, corporations are not. Online mobs are not. If private actors punish speech deemed offensive, the practical result is a narrowing of public discourse. This creates an environment where people are afraid to speak for fear of professional ruin. The nationwide reckoning over online speech brought a critical distinction into sharp focus. The rules for public sector employees are fundamentally different from those for their private sector counterparts. While a private company can generally fire an employee for their speech, The government as an employer is bound by the First Amendment. However, this protection is not absolute. Over decades, the Supreme Court developed a balancing test to weigh the speech rights of government workers against the government's interest in maintaining an efficient public service. This created a complex legal landscape that played out in real time as public institutions disciplined their staff. For public employees, the key precedent is the Pickering-Connick test. Teachers, police officers, soldiers. The framework requires courts to ask two main questions. First, was the employee speaking as a private citizen on a matter of public concern? If not, if the speech was part of their official duties, it's generally not protected. Second, if they were speaking as a private citizen, courts must balance the employee's First Amendment interest against the government's interest in promoting efficient public services. A teacher celebrating the shooting, for example, may speak as a private citizen. But a school district has a strong interest in maintaining a safe, orderly learning environment free from the disruption such a statement would cause. This balancing act leads to different outcomes in different contexts. A firefighter who posted a celebratory message might be disciplined because that speech could undermine public trust in the fire department. Similarly, a soldier is subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which places even stricter limits on speech to maintain good order and discipline. In contrast, a private sector software engineer who works from home and has no public-facing role might have a stronger argument that their off-duty speech has no bearing on job performance, yet their employer is under no constitutional obligation to perform this balancing act. This fundamental difference explains why a public school teacher might be suspended pending an investigation, while a corporate employee is fired immediately. The public employee has constitutional rights to due process and free speech that the private employee simply does not have in the employment context. The shooting of Charlie Kirk and the explosive fallout that followed have pushed the United States to a critical juncture, a crossroads. This moment is not merely about a single act of violence or a handful of firings. It is a symptom of deeper converging crises, political polarization, the omnipresence of social media, a deteriorating public trust in institutions. The incident acted as an accelerant, forcing a national conversation to boil over into the open. It has laid bare the inadequacy of our legal and social frameworks where every utterance can be amplified globally and judged instantaneously by a virtual mob. Looking ahead, several key developments are likely to emerge from this crisis. First, a new wave of legal challenges testing employee speech rights. Fired employees, particularly in the public sector, may sue their former employers, leading to court cases that could refine or redefine the Pickering balancing test for the social media era. We may also see attempts to pass new legislation. Some politicians may propose laws aimed at curbing hate speech online. Conversely, other politicians may introduce bills designed to protect workers from being fired for their off-duty political speech. Beyond the courts and legislatures, we are likely to see significant shifts in corporate policy and public opinion. Companies, spooked by PR nightmares and boycotts, will rush to clarify their social media policies. This will lead to a more formalized and likely more restrictive environment for employee speech. At the same time, public opinion will continue to be fiercely debated. The conversation about cancel culture versus accountability will intensify. This debate will shape not just corporate policies, but the social norms that govern our everyday interactions. Ultimately, the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk shooting serves as a stark warning about the fragility of public discourse in a hyper-partisan age. The path forward is fraught with peril. Overreach by the government or corporations could lead to a sanitized and censored public square, while a failure to enforce any standards could allow hatred and incitement to flourish, potentially leading to more violence. Navigating this crossroads will require a level of nuance, tolerance, and commitment to free speech principles. The choices we make now, in our courtrooms, in our statehouses, and in our communities, will determine the character of American democracy for years to come.